And it's so striking to me if you actually think about it, that if you look at the world's really great philosophers, 98% of them simply trash mere empiricism or mere materialism. There's just no consistent, coherent way you can support that naive doctrine.
No.
And yet virtually everybody's, wake-a-day philosophy and practicing scientists and so on have a kind of a naive empirical or a naive materialist view of the world.
Right.
Whereas in the community of experts who look into it, none of them agree with that view.
Right.
So it's really interesting that I think it's important that people come to terms with the fact that naive sensory, naive materialism, naive realism just doesn't work at all.
Doesn't work at all.
And so once you got disabused of that, it's not surprising to me that then you started having, as you said, very intense mystical experiences.
Right, exactly.
And I think that's part of the point, is once attention is riveted away from the shadows in the cave, as if they're real, then you start to be open to light of various other sorts. And it's not hallucinatory.
No.
It's more real than the naive realism that you just sort of transcended and included, let's put it that way.
Absolutely.
But what were the nature of some of the mystical experiences that you were having?
Well, I'll tell you. The first was an intellectual illumination, where I was walking with some friends of mine on an October afternoon in a backfield at St. Anselm's. They have 500 acres. And all of a sudden, I saw the structure of being. It was intellectual vision, which is a rare, I think it's a rare.
That doesn't happen more than 2 or 3 times a day for most people.
For most people, right, exactly. But this was an overpowering experience because I saw this structure, and the way I saw it was, the way it came to me, the way I conceptualize it is that it really answers the question, why is there something rather than nothing?
Yeah. Schelling's great question.
And Parmenides and Heidegger.
Yeah.
And what I saw is that if you can conceptualize it, there is essential existence, which is, I guess, would be equivalent, if it's a valid description of Whitehead, of the primordial nature
of God.
Primordial nature of God.
Right.
Although I'm wondering if that primordial nature of God is our concept, where we haven't yet arrived at a fuller understanding of God, or whether it applies to God itself, But at any rate, or himself, or herself, or their self. But what was interesting was that I saw the ground of all manifestation in the possibilities and potentialities, an infinitely infinite series of them, in various universes that exist in the divine mind, which really don't add anything to the divine itself, but are related to potentialities of possible existent beings, and maybe necessary existent beings. That creation happens to fulfill that knowledge that God has. Doesn't fulfill God's being as such, but the knowledge. And so that what is going on in creation, and what I lacked was the understanding of the relationship between time and eternity. And so what happened was, I saw this in a blinding realization, existential clarity that was overwhelming. And it just gripped us for like 15 hours.
Us?
I was with this group.
You explained it to them?
For 15 hours.
And they were in it with
We were
you?
up all night. Yeah, the whole night. We were in it. And then one of them said to me, you must write it down. So in the morning, I wrote it down, and it became prefatory to a metaphysics of nothingness. Just a brief essay. I'll send it to you. But at any rate, so you see these essential existence and all these possibilities. And
in all possible universes.
In all possible universes. And this gives rise to what we call it becoming, or existence in becoming.
In time.
In time, which is contained by eternity, where all these possibilities and potentialities are being actualized.
Right.
Now, when all the potentialities are actualized in existence, you have absolute existence, where the essential existence and becoming are integrated in absolute realization of all possibilities. God is all in all, if you will. Now that never happens in time, but it already has happened in eternity. That's what I saw.
That's a good afternoon.
Yeah. So that I wanted to mention something about Hegel. One of the insights I got about Hegel, and this would apply to Plotinus and Plato, Spinoza, Kierkegaard probably, is that what I experienced about Hegel is, I was reading one day a line in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, where he says, something like the moral life in its immediate truth is the ethical life of a nation. I read that sentence, and all of a sudden I experienced his mind, his consciousness. And with it came an insight that this was a rare species of mystic,
Yeah.
that he is an intellectual mystic.
Yeah.
He's jnana, he's a jnani.
Yeah.
And I think the great philosophers have been jnanis. That is, they're both mystic and metaphysician at the same time.
For those of you who don't know the word that Wayne was using, a jnani yoga, J-N-A-N-I, and J-N-A in Sanskrit is similar in our English. We have two roots to that. One is J-N-O, which is gnosis.
Yes.
So J-N-A and J-N-O are very similar.
Yes.
So jnana and gnosis are essentially similar words. And in English we have K-N-O, as in knowledge. And those are all essentially saying the same thing. So there's a great, great lineage of deeply realized beings who are also very, very gifted intellectuals. And they often express this realization through an intellectual love of God and an intellectual expression of that. And so a lot of people get a little, especially in our age of sensory immersion,
right.
when sensory whoopee is equated with spirituality, which is, there's nothing wrong with sensory whoopee, it's just a very small portion of what spirit does on any given Saturday night. But the intellectual love of God is somehow thought to be an abstraction away from God. It's just the opposite. It's a very profound expression of a mystical realization. And so you're giving, I think, one just of the classic, really beautiful intellectual illuminations.
Yeah.
And they all tend to have similar-ish types of things, which is what's the relation of this eternal isness to the manifest world of becoming.
Absolutely.
And somehow it has to transcend and include it. And it's, Aristotle's written on it, Hegel's written on it, Parmenides, Plotinus. And it's a wonderful orientation to do that, because it helps straighten out the intellect and put it in relation to spirit.
Absolutely.
So it can become an expression of spirit and not a detraction from it.
And when it happens, it's not like thinking. It's like you're
Absolutely.
carried along in a stream of awareness.
Of vision.
Vision, it's vision.
It's absolute clear vision.
It's intellectual vision.
Yeah.
It's a mystical experience.
Yeah.
And I think what it might be, if you wanted to connect it with the tradition, you might say that it's similar to what Augustine is talking about in Illumination. That in his epistemology, we know through participating in the divine mind.
Right.
This is an instance of that kind of participation in the divine mind, where you're kind of carried along in this incredible knowing. It's a knowing.
And which is great. And there are obviously other kinds of mystical experiences, including nothingness, emptiness, openness, where there's no vision at all.
Right, and not knowing.
And not knowing.
Not knowing conceptually, intellectually, but knowing knowing the divine presence, but not...
But both are required.
Both are required.
Because we exist in a manifest world, and therefore we ought to have an intellectual way to understand that existence.
Right.
And I relate to it because many of the books that I've done come in that kind of intense, quick vision.
Yes.
And most of the books that I've done, I see in maybe 15 minutes. And it's just a matter of writing them down.
Right.
And so, I think that's very important. And nobody confuses that with also direct suchness or direct conceptual less awareness, which is also possible. But intellectual illumination is a very important part of an integral approach to spirituality. Absolutely required.
Yeah.
So that was great. So that was okay. Well, that was a good afternoon. That October.
That was a great afternoon.
Yeah.